In July, Unity 22, with Virgin Galactic CEO Branson and a few close friends, launched on a 15-minute tour to make it to space before fellow billionaire Jeff Bezos did it with his friends, or did they? I'm going to talk about what really happened with Unity 22, so stick with me on Flywire. Hey, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on Flywire we're going to review the flight of Unity 22, the Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2, that launched on July 11, 2021 in a billionaire race to space. The race was, or is, between commercially owned space programs owned by billionaires, but before you think that I don't approve of privately funded and ownership of space rockets, I'll say right now that's not true. NASA was brilliant in its early days, but bureaucratic arteriosclerosis set in a while ago. For humans to make it to space and stay there, it has to be commercialized. If you've read Robert Heinlein or heard of the Heinlein Prize, you know what I mean. I don't mind a space race between billionaires. I do have an issue with grandstanding and making it all about you. Essentially, that is what Virgin Galactic launch, the Virgin Galactic launch, seems to be all about, or should I say it was all about Branson. And the blue Origin Bezos shot was all about him as well. Not the accomplishment or the promise of commercially funded space programs. One thing you can say about Elon Musk is that he builds serious stuff. SpaceX is the real deal for real space access. I'm afraid that Virgin Galactic program will be all about space tourism. The jury is still out on Blue Origin. There is one aspect of the space race that is troublesome, and that is the rush to be first. Corners tend to be cut then. And with cut corners, the harsh reality of space and the energy required to get there means that a small problem can become fatal in a split second. Just to be clear, the billionaire shots in July were not fatal. There is, however, a question about whether Unity 22 or the Blue Origin actually made it into space. The argument here boils down to where the space border is. There's no actual border or specific line. For suborbital flights since back in the 50s, the common definition of space and the awarding of astronaut wings in the U.S. has been 50 miles. These days, the Kármán line, which is 62 miles high, is the most accepted border for space flight, and the FAI, the maintainer of world records, uses this definition. If you want to stay in orbit, you have to get above the Kármán line. And just FYI, it takes roughly 32 times suborbital energy to get into orbit. Unity 22 crested at 51.4 miles altitude, and Blue Origin, according to some reports, only made it to 47 miles high. Who am I to quibble? I've never been that high. You be the judge. A few days ago, the FAA grounded the Spaceship 2 operation pending an investigation of this flight of Unity 22. One wonders why they were grounded. And no, it wasn't an altitude deviation per se, it was more of an airspace deviation. The FAA grants spaceflight permission to fly based on a profile submitted to them, and Unity 22 did not stay within the confines of that profile. Let's break down this flight of Unity 22. So to get there, it has to have a rocket, right? And that rocket motor in this case uses a rubber-based material as a fuel and liquid nitrous oxygen as the oxidizer. The motor burns for 1 minute, and one aspect of this type of fuel is the motor either is on or it's off. You can't throttle it, so the fuel burns until it's gone, and that happens in 1 minute, or you shut it off. Unity's 22 rocket motor burn was nominal, which is space talk for meaning that it performed as planned. Why did the spacecraft exceed the airspace cleared for it? And that's an interesting question, and actually mostly related to human factors. So what did happen on this flight? What is most important to know is that the Virgin Galactic spaceship is an extrapolated design of Burt Rutan's Spaceship 1. The first of its kind, and the winner of the X Prize is the first manned privately owned spacecraft to go into space and return to Earth and then fly into space again within a specified short period of time. The Rutan design is a piloted spacecraft, and the Spaceship 1 pilots were extraordinary. There are some critical maneuvers that need to be accomplished in specific sequences, and it takes a crew at the top of its game to accomplish all of them. As we all know, when people are involved, mistakes can happen. Murphy's Law says that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. The Spaceship 2 is a manual spaceplane. It is dropped from a mothership above most of the Earth's atmosphere before lighting its own rocket. Then the pilot crew must hand fly, and they must fly the profile to the letter. That hasn't always happened. During a test flight in 2011, the Spaceship Two vehicle got into an inverted spin. The pilots were able to recover the spacecraft to a normal landing. In 2014, the first Spaceship Two vehicle was lost when the co-pilot unlocked the feather control too early, and during high-speed flight, the vibrations overcame the pins and the tail boom deployed to feather position. The resulting aerodynamic forces broke the spacecraft apart, killing the co-pilot and ejecting the pilot, who was then able to deploy his personal parachute and survive the crash because he wasn't in it. In 2018, when in the spacecraft, in 2018, Unity 22 flight crew lost control of the spacecraft 30 miles high, tumbling and spinning the aircraft. They were able to recover the ship and land normally. However, the damage to the vehicle required much to repair. In 2019, the same crew, this is the crew that flew this one, flew with a test engineer in a flight that incurred significant damage when the bond holding the trailing edge of the horizontal stabilizer came apart and the loss of the ship was narrowly averted. The Vice President of Safety and Flight Test resigned over the efforts to sweep this flaw under the rug. A 40-page report outlining the observations and recommendations was produced by a retired Boeing executive on this incident and then not shared with the Flight Test Department. In an internal email, the Chief of Flight Test said test pilots should be more transparent and admit their mistakes, saying, "Failure to admit mistakes in flight test is a cancer that must be nipped in the bud." Motivated in large part by the crew's unwillingness to take responsibility for their mistakes on the 2018 flight, the Chief of Flight Test fell on his sword, so to speak, over this incident, and reportedly he's a legend in the flight test community. The Chief of Flight Test was fired via Zoom after the Branson flight in Unity 2.2. So what happened to Unity 2.2 that we don't know about? Sometime in the last 15 seconds of the rocket burn for the flight, a yellow warning light came on in the cockpit. At that point, the spacecraft was about 20 miles high, and the light was a warning that the trajectory was too low and needed to be fixed. Other test pilots have noted that if the light turned red, then it would be too late and the craft would no longer be able to shape its flight path to the entry glide cone. The problem was the trajectory was not steep enough and the pilots needed to raise the nose, and they didn't get the ship to the required pitch angle. The red warning light illuminated apparently. And if you aren't in the entry glide cone, then you won't have enough energy to return to the landing airport. Okay, they did. The Unity 22 crew was able to return to the launch port, but they violated the assigned airspace to do so. And since a pilot was at the controls and a pilot was required to fly the assigned trajectory and no emergency was declared, therefore this was his mistake, and their subsequent FAA grounding is all on the pilot and the procedures that they followed. Unity 22 was supposed to fly again with members of the Italian Air Force in September, but the FAA investigation has canceled or postponed that flight. Branson himself has said that a private program cannot afford to lose anybody. In response to the FAA grounding, a company spokesperson said the Virgin Galactic is guided by fundamental commitment to safety at every level. Somehow, the firing of the Chief of Flight Test and the VP of Safety and Flight Test over these incidents doesn't sound like a serious commitment to safety. It sounds more like a company in a hurry to be first into space. You know, it might be a good idea to let someone else ride that rocket into space for a while. Well, I hope you liked the video. If you did, hit like and subscribe. It looks a bit like this here. I'd also like to thank my Patreon supporters. I appreciate your support. If you'd like to support the channel, I'll leave a link down below. Meanwhile, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Flywire.